Welcome back to Working Hands Making Stuff. This video is part 2 of the Backsplash tile video series of 2. We're going to grout the tile that we put up in the previous video. When I finished the tile work last time, I put the outlets back so that we could use the kitchen. That was a weekend, and I needed to work the following Monday, so I knew I wouldn't be able to get to grouting until the weekend. So we needed to use the kitchen. Now the first thing we have to do is get the outlet covers off, and then we need to mix grout. Now I'm going to start with about 1/3 of the grout mix and go from there. As with the mortar, just make sure you have a dust mask, because the dry dust from the grout can irritate your lungs and your throat. So just be very cognizant of that. You really want to be safe when you're dealing with this stuff dry. So I'm going to go get some water, and then you'll see I'm just going to add just a little bit of water and start mixing. You want to use less water than you think you actually need, and just mix slowly, get it all incorporated. It's going to be crumbly. That's okay. Let me try to move this camera. Okay. Now, I'm just mixing this together and adding just a little bit of water, getting it to a thick paste, and then mixing some more. The ultimate consistency that we want here is very smooth peanut butter, maybe sour cream texture. It's not super thick, but very smooth. So we're going to start with lumps here, but we're going to work those out. Make sure you scrape the bottoms and the sides. Because any dust that you have left behind will just absorb water. Now here I'm going to switch to a putty knife, and I'm just going to smooth that more, and you'll notice I'm just adding water a few drops at a time here, just barely, just to get it to the consistency that I like. A few more drops of water, a little bit more mixing. This is one of those things you really want to go at slowly, because if you add too much water, it just becomes a mess. And there it is. That's about the consistency you want. So. I'm going to start out using an offset grout float to get into that tight area around the outlets at the edge of the backsplash. The most important part here is that you push that grout into the gaps. To be honest, this offset grout tile is not really a comfortable tool for me to use, but because of the shape and the size of this area, using a regular grout float was just going to be more difficult. So just push that oven out of the way. keep working and just get that grout into the joints. Make sure it's in there really well. As you can see, I've got very thick grout lines right now, and that's because of those bevels on that tile. And that's going to be a lot of grout that needs to be cleaned out. And you'll see that in a few minutes here. So, I'm still using that offset grout float, but you'll see in a minute I give up on it here. There you go, just pushing the last of the grout out of that float, and I'm going to switch to a different grout float. And this one, so much easier to use, so much easier to push into with, and it's mostly because of where your hand position is. When you're pushing down, you're pushing directly into that grout, into the gaps, whereas with the offset, you're sort of pushing with your wrist in an awkward position. Again, for those tight spaces, it's useful. But for these wider spaces, I don't know why I waited so long to actually switch to a normal grout float, but there it is. And I'm off camera again. I need a better camera person. I'm not sure if you could see it there underneath the microwave, but that's a little pencil edge that was also added, again off camera. Now I've moved the camera and there's my wife cleaning the grout with just a sponge and water. That's all it takes, is just wiping it down repeatedly. I think we had to wipe the tile down probably 3 or 4 times ultimately to get all the haze off, because it's just that's what it takes. That's the job. Just wipe and rinse. Wipe and rinse. Now you'll see here I'm using the last of the grout that I have already mixed, pushing it in with my fingers. I'm trying to get it all used up before mixing my next batch. This is primarily because I'm going to have to clean the bucket before I mix another batch. And of course, there I am just smearing it directly into the lines using my finger. Now that edge right there that I'm getting around the window is a gap that was too thin to cut a piece of tile, but too thick to just leave bare. So we decided to just fill it with a little bit of grout there. So at this point, I go to mix another batch of grout. My wife continues to clean up the grout and finding spots that I didn't push in deeply enough, and I wind up coming back and fixing. Now, I did something really stupid when I went to mix up the rest of the batch. This is the majority of my kitchen already done. I have a small section left, and as I said, I used about 1/3 of that bag of grout, and without thinking, I went and dumped the remainder 2/3 of the bag into the bucket. Not only that, but since I already wasn't thinking, I wound up putting in way too much water and made the grout much too thin. This caused me to have to leave the bucket on the counter for about 30 minutes so that it would thicken up a little before I could apply it. And even then, it was still a little bit thin. And here you can see me, just going to town with my fingers because I had put it in with a grout float. And then I started wiping with a sponge and I was pulling the grout out. And what makes this really, really more of a pain in the neck is that any grout that's on top of the tiles, because it's so thin, is drying harder, faster than what's in the actual joints. So I put it in, and then I let it dry, and then I wipe it with sponge and water and rinse the water out numerous times. So at this point, I go sit down for about 30 minutes and come back and start wiping with the sponge. And you'll notice here in a minute that I decide that this sponge just isn't doing it because this grout on the tile, on the surface, has dried so much that I go and get a sponge with a little bit of a scrubby there and take the scrubby to get all those little bits off of the face of the tile. Anyway, I just wind up wiping and rinsing the sponges and changing the water. I must have done it a dozen times. I must have changed the water in that bucket. And it's all because of my own stupidity. The other 2/3 of the kitchen literally took half the effort because I put too much water into that mortar, and then I had to wait for it to dry before I could get it cleaned up without disturbing the mortar in the joints. So take that as a lesson. Don't do what I did. Make sure you go slow when mixing your mortar. Another point I'd like to mention is that because this is natural stone, there are little divots and small holes in the face of the tile. And this will happen with any natural stone product that is not smooth. And actually, even like the granite countertop that I have there that looks smooth actually has some divots. The grout will go into those small pock marks. And this is just a naturally occurring thing. And you don't avoid it, which is why you want a grout that matches the tile so it doesn't stick out, but it does give a little additional character if it's a slightly different color than what you have. What we're looking at here is just way too much grout on the surface of the tile that needs to be wiped off. And there I am, just wipe, rinse, repeat. almost done with this small section, and I started with clean water here in this section, and look at how nasty that water is already. And I'm not done. That is still a lot of grout on the surface of those tiles, on the face of those tiles. And now the scrubby on the face, and you'll just, it's like a magic eraser, just getting rid of all that excess. Get that all cleaned up. Wipe it dry. And at this point, we just pull the tape off the edge that I had used to just protect the wall and give me a sharp line with my grout line, so I didn't have grout on the painted surface of the wall. And that's it. That's pretty basic, simple technique, not very expensive, gives a nice makeover in any kitchen, I would say. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you like what I'm doing on this channel, please hit the subscribe button. And if you have any questions or comments for me, please feel free to leave them down below in the comments. If there's something you'd like to see me do, just leave that in the comments. I read all the comments and I try to answer as many questions as I can. As always, thanks for following along, and I hope to see you in the next video.